Kindness doesn't always whisper. It sometimes echoes loud enough to make giants flinch. Let us know in the comment section below, have you ever seen a small act change everything? Brionna Reese never asked for permission to be kind. Not from the man who owned the place, not from the rules taped behind the freezer door, and certainly not from the laminated "No Handouts" sign nailed crookedly to the staff room bulletin board. She just did what she had to. Quietly, thoughtfully, and sometimes, when it involved the boy in the hoodie with the shy eyes, bravely. It started with a biscuit. She didn't plan it. Brionna had just finished the side station prep, arms dusted in flour, when she saw him again. Noah. The kid was waiting outside, perched on the splintered bench near the newspaper stand like he was invisible. He never came in, never asked, never knocked. But every morning his eyes followed the servers carrying out trays of waffles, hash browns, bacon, like his stomach was memorizing the smells. That morning she slid half a biscuit into a to-go cup, slipped in a honey packet, and nudged it behind the bin just outside the back door. Didn't say a word, didn't need to. When she stepped back inside, the look he gave her as he rounded the corner, like someone had just unzipped the cold from his ribs, was enough. Enough to make her do it again the next day and the one after that. French toast crusts, a few sausage links that weren't served, a slice of pie someone returned for being too brown on top. Nothing stolen, just salvaged. A rule bent by mercy. She told herself it wasn't a big deal. She told herself if the world had more meals like that one, quiet and anonymous and given without asking, it might feel less cruel. Then came the morning she got caught. "You feeding that kid again?" The words came like a cracked whip. Brionna froze, still bent near the coffee carafes, hand halfway to the top shelf for a filter. She turned slowly, every hair on her neck lifting. The voice belonged to Ron Delaney, the manager, tall, balding, with a permanent squint that made him look like he was always halfway to suspicion. His arms were crossed, his apron smudged, and his jaw tight enough to chip stone. "I asked you a question." Brionna didn't flinch. "I was throwing out scraps." He snorted. "You think I'm blind?" There were 3 waitresses on the morning shift that day, but the only one standing by the coffee was her. She knew exactly what he saw, knew he must have caught the movement by the rear alley, the faint rustle of that kid's sneakers as he ducked behind the bin. Maybe he even saw the cup vanish into the folds of Noah's hoodie. Ron's voice dropped, low and cruel. "This is a business, not a charity. That boy? He's not even a customer." "He's hungry," Brionna said simply. Ron stepped closer. "And that's not your problem." Her heart beat so hard it felt like a drum shoved between her ribs, but her voice, somehow, didn't shake. "Then maybe it should be." That was it. The last line before things tipped. Ron's face turned blotchy. "You think you're special, Reese? You think your little pity parade gets you a pass? You do it again? I'll write you up. You don't stop, you're out. I don't care if that kid's got 10 starving grandmothers. We don't feed strays, you hear me?" She didn't answer. Just walked back to the counter, heart loud in her throat, hands trembling as she wiped up a spill that wasn't there. She didn't tell anyone what happened, didn't text anyone, didn't vent to the fry cook, didn't cry in the freezer like she had after her mother's last hospital bill had drained the last of her tuition money. She just worked, served, smiled, took orders, refilled coffee, and when she left for the day, her apron folded under her arm, she didn't glance at the bin. But Noah was gone. That night she barely slept. Kept thinking about him, where he was, if he ate, if someone else had the sense to care when it wasn't convenient. But mostly she thought about how small her kindness had been, and yet how loud it became when someone tried to silence it. The next morning she clocked in at 6:58, 2 minutes early. She moved through the motions, diner light flickering overhead, booths still sticky from the last dinner rush, smell of scorched toast and undercooked eggs drifting from the back. But something was different. Ron wasn't at the register. The dishwasher wasn't humming, and outside, through the front window that faced the lot, Brionna saw something she couldn't process at first. Over 4 black Escalades, parked side by side like sentinels, engines humming low, windows tinted dark as obsidian. No other cars, no deliveries, just those 4 machines, idling quietly like the morning was waiting for a cue. Brionna stood still, coffee pot in hand, her breath catching. Something had changed. And for the first time since she slipped that biscuit into that cup, she realized this wasn't just about her anymore. The doors chimed. Not the tinny jingle they were used to, no. This time it sounded almost reluctant, like even the bell knew something was off. Brionna looked up from her usual post behind the counter and watched as 2 sharply dressed men entered the diner. They didn't belong here. Tailored charcoal suits, subtle earpieces, expressionless faces that scanned the room like it held secrets instead of old booths and sticky menus. One was tall, with salt and pepper hair cut military short. The other had a trim goatee and the kind of shoes that had never touched a back alley. They didn't speak, just looked. One of them met Brionna's eyes, held her gaze for half a second too long before turning to the other and nodding once. Outside, the engines of the black Escalades rumbled low. The few regulars seated for early breakfast, an older couple splitting pancakes, a trucker hunched over bacon, and the cook who occasionally sat to scratch his lotto ticket, froze mid-bite. The air shifted, went quiet. Even the radio on low behind the counter seemed to lower its volume, sensing the tension that had drifted in like smoke. Then came the woman. Lucille Daniels walked in as if she owned the air. She wasn't tall, but she didn't need height. She wore a deep emerald coat, fitted like it was made for her and no one else, and her gray-streaked hair was swept back into a soft, elegant twist. Her heels clacked once on the old linoleum before she stopped and looked around with eyes that had nothing of age in them. Only fire. "Noah," she said, not asking, telling. The room tilted. Brionna's heart thundered beneath her apron. Gone? Delaney came out from the office in the back with his tablet under his arm, chewing on a granola bar and muttering something about inventory until he saw them. He stopped dead mid-step. "Can I help you folks?" he asked, voice stretched thin. Lucille didn't answer him right away. She didn't even really look at him. She turned to Brionna instead. "You're the girl who gave my grandson food." Brianna's throat went dry. She set down the order pad she wasn't writing on. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you." 2 words. No more. But Brionna felt the weight of them, like the entire room just bowed to something heavier than guilt or rules. Ron took a step forward, trying to puff himself up. "I'm the manager here. If there's some kind of issue—" "There is," Lucille said, still without looking at him. "You made a child feel ashamed for being hungry." Ron blinked. He was loitering. "We can't just let people take food out back. It's a health code thing, a safety." "I don't believe I was speaking to you," Lucille snapped, finally turning. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cracked through the air like thunder in a cathedral. The suited men behind her didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't need to. One of the customers dropped his fork. Ron laughed nervously. "Look, lady, I'm just trying to run a business. I'm sorry if your grandson got his feelings hurt, but we've got rules here." Lucille stepped forward slowly. "Do you know who I am?" Ron opened his mouth, then closed it. "I don't mean in a bragging way. I'm not here for attention," she continued. "I'm here because someone thought feeding my grandson was an act worth punishing." Brionna watched, a knot tightening behind her ribs. She didn't know if this was about to spiral or somehow fix itself, but either way, something irreversible had already been set into motion. "My son," Lucille said, gesturing toward the door, "is arriving shortly. I suggest you prepare to have a conversation you won't enjoy." Ron looked like he was trying to calculate something in his head and losing the battle. "Okay, now hang on. Nobody said anything about—" The door opened again. This time, the silence wasn't just respectful. It was reverent. A man stepped in, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a crisp Army Green Service uniform. His boots hit the floor with the sound of purpose, not weight. His face was composed, but his jaw clenched like it had been doing so for years. Medals glinted on his chest. We walked past every booth, every table, past the counter and the pie case, and stood beside his mother. "Major Christopher Daniels, retired," he said. Ron blinked again, a bead of sweat forming near his temple. "You're the one who humiliated my nephew?" Ron looked at Brionna, then back at the Major, trying to find a foothold. "Sir, look, I didn't mean anything by it. I didn't even know who he was." "That's the problem," Christopher said. "You didn't need to know who he was to treat him with decency." Lucille stepped forward again, this time with the confidence of a judge pronouncing sentence. "You embarrassed him in front of other customers. You raised your voice at a child. You called him a stray." Ron went pale. "And yet," she continued, "this young woman, who had no obligation to do anything but serve coffee and clean counters, saw a child in need and helped him. Quietly, compassionately, at risk to her own job." She turned back to Brionna and smiled, soft and brief. Christopher pulled a folded paper from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "My family owns 12 restaurant franchises across the state. One call, and this diner could be a different place by Friday." Ron's lips moved but made no sound. "We're not here to destroy you," Lucille said. "We're here to teach you something." Christopher nodded. "And to thank the person who remembered that feeding someone isn't a liability. It's humanity." Brionna stood frozen, not because she was afraid, but because in a place where kindness had always been quiet, it had finally roared. The diner didn't return to normal. Not that morning. Not ever, really. After the Escalades rolled in and the Daniels family walked back out, it felt like the walls had learned to breathe again, but slower, deeper, with something that almost resembled purpose. The regulars whispered between bites. A few customers left bigger tips than usual. And Ron Delaney? He stopped barking orders for once. Brionna moved through the shift like she was underwater. Every step felt buoyed by something unfamiliar. Maybe it was validation, maybe it was adrenaline, maybe it was fear's ghost finally slipping out the back door. All she knew was that something irreversible had happened. She found herself wiping a perfectly clean table for the 3rd time when the bell above the door rang again. This time it wasn't an officer or a matriarch or a man with medals. It was Noah. Same hoodie, same quiet eyes. But this time he stepped inside. He held a paper bag in his hands, grease-stained and slightly crumpled. He didn't move past the threshold. Just stood there, looking at her. Brionna walked around the counter. "Hey." "Hi," he said, almost too quiet to hear. "You okay?" He nodded, then offered the bag. Inside was a blueberry muffin, slightly squashed, probably bought with someone else's spare change. It smelled like it had come from the corner bakery 2 blocks down. "I wanted to say thank you," Noah mumbled. "It's not much, but it's yours." Brionna crouched so they were eye level. Her chest ached in the best kind of way. "You didn't have to bring me anything." "I know." He stood there, small hands clutching empty space now, waiting. She smiled. "I love muffins." That was all it took. He smiled, too. Ron didn't say a word. He stayed in the back that morning, letting the other servers handle everything. Whether out of shame or fear or pure discomfort, Brionna didn't care. She didn't need an apology from him anymore. Later that day, she got a call from an unfamiliar number. "Ms. Reese?" "Yeah. This is Captain Ashford. I work closely with Major Daniels. He asked me to reach out." Brionna's pulse quickened. Is something wrong? No, ma'am, quite the opposite. The Major and his mother were very moved by what you did. We're hosting a community event this weekend, Family Day for local veterans and their families. The Daniels family is one of our key sponsors. They've asked that you be a guest of honor. I'm not a veteran, she said quickly, almost apologetically. We know, but sometimes it's not just soldiers who show courage. Sometimes it's the ones who stand beside them. She didn't know what to say. Captain Ashford continued, There's one more thing. Major Daniels is starting a foundation. He'd like to offer you a job. Brionna nearly dropped the phone. The job? Yes, ma'am. The Hope Table Project. It's a pilot program aimed at addressing food insecurity in communities by partnering with local businesses. The Major believes someone like you, someone who sees beyond policy and into people, should be part of its launch. She sat down at the booth where she had served Mr. Delaney his coffee every morning for a year. The seat was still warm from the last customer. I don't have any non-profit experience, she said softly. Doesn't matter. What matters is that you knew a hungry boy didn't need a lecture. He needed a biscuit. Brionna smiled, blinking hard. I'd be honored. By Friday, posters appeared on the bulletin board. Community Veterans Appreciation Day, Saturday at Riverside Field. Brionna almost didn't go, not because she didn't want to, but because part of her still felt like an outsider, a waitress who once had dreams of med school and now made perfect hash browns instead. She wasn't decorated, she wasn't connected. But then, Saturday came, and Noah was waiting at the corner when she stepped out her apartment. He held her hand all the way there. Riverside Field looked nothing like the last time she'd seen it during a summer carnival. Flags fluttered along the fences, booths were set up in rows, veterans in wheelchairs sharing stories beside high schoolers handing out free water bottles. There were kids running in red, white, and blue face paint, families laughing, music playing low beneath the sound of real community. And then there was the tent, big white canopy, brushed chrome letters on a banner, the Hope Table Project, because no one eats alone. Major Daniels stood at the center. He spotted Brionna instantly. He wasn't wearing his uniform now, just a soft blue button-up and slacks. But the presence? Still there. He stepped forward and offered a handshake. Glad you came. Brionna nodded. I almost didn't. Why not? I guess I didn't think I'd belong. He smiled gently. You fed someone who couldn't pay you. You didn't ask for credit. You didn't do it for attention. You did it because it was right. If more people did what you did, we wouldn't need foundations like this. She swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Lucille appeared beside him, handing Brionna a name badge. You're not just welcome here, dear. You're necessary. All around them, the town gathered, not just veterans but restaurant owners, families, teachers, people who'd heard about that morning at the diner and came to say, we saw what happened. And then someone tapped the mic. A local reporter standing on the small stage. Before we begin today's festivities, we want to honor someone who reminded us that kindness is an act of courage. Brionna Reese. Please join us. The applause started with Lucille, then Major Daniels, then Noah, then the crowd. And Brionna walked up, one step at a time, not to be thanked, but to remind everyone that kindness doesn't ask for a stage. It just builds one. The applause was still echoing in Brionna's ears as she stepped down from the platform, cheeks flushed, heart pounding, not from nerves anymore, but from something gentler, a fullness, a peace she hadn't expected. She'd stood on that makeshift stage and accepted a plaque with her name carved in gold. For compassion in action, it said. Below it, the date. Just a wooden square, really. But the weight of it in her hands made her feel like maybe, for the first time since her mother passed, something she did had actually mattered. Noah was waiting at the bottom of the steps, holding 2 plastic cups of pink lemonade like they were gold medals. You did awesome, he whispered, offering her one. "You think so?" she asked, taking a sip. He nodded seriously. Everybody clapped. That made her laugh, warm and deep. Around them, Riverside Field was alive. Children darted between booths, veterans traded stories over hot dogs, and local business owners handed out flyers for job fairs and support groups. The Hope Table tent had become a gathering point, with volunteers signing up restaurant partners, local farms, and even school reps who wanted in. No one had expected it to grow this quickly. Brionna least of all. A woman from the mayor's office had even stopped by, shaking her hand and promising a city grant to kickstart the first Hopetail Cafe, a food-sharing concept where meals paid forward by diners would be redeemed by those in need, no questions asked. As the afternoon faded into early evening, Brionna sat on a picnic bench near the tree line with Noah beside her and a light breeze playing with the hem of her sundress. The laughter from the crowd had a softer edge now, the energy turning mellow. She thought back to that morning in the diner. The coffee, the biscuit, the shout from Ron Delaney. It felt like another life. Speaking of Ron, he showed up, not loudly, not with that usual strut, just cautiously, in khakis instead of his grease-stained apron. No clipboard, no bark. Just a man carrying a Tupperware container and a look in his eyes Brionna didn't recognize. Noah noticed him first. He tensed. Brionna rested a calming hand on his arm. Ron walked up slowly, eyes on the ground more than anything. When he finally looked up, his expression wasn't angry or defensive. It was tired, humble, human. "I don't expect a welcome," he said, voice rough, "and I'm not here to make a scene." Brionna stayed quiet, letting him continue. "I talked to my sister last night," he said, holding up the container. "She runs a bakery in town. I told her about you, about the boy, about how I screwed up." Brionna arched an eyebrow. He exhaled. "She made these? Thought they might help smooth things over." Brionna reached for the lid and peeled it back. Inside were the most beautiful sugar cookies she'd ever seen, frosted with little hearts, red, white, and glue stars, and one that read, "Nobody eats alone." "I'm not good with words," Ron said. "Never have been. But I know when I've been wrong, and I was. I let rules get bigger than people." Brionna glanced at Noah. He was watching Ron, suspicious but curious. "Will you help me do better?" Ron asked. Brionna didn't answer right away. She looked back at the field. Families, strangers, veterans, volunteers, all sitting side by side under string lights, and a sky just beginning to turn the color of forgiveness. She turned back to Ron. "You showing up today is a start." He swallowed hard, nodding. "Then I'll keep showing up." She handed the cookie tin to Noah, who grinned and grabbed the hard one. "These are good," he said with his mouth full. Ron actually chuckled. "Tell my sister. She never believes me." Brionna gave a slow, measured smile. "Next week, we're hosting our first Hope Table lunch shift at the community center. Want to come help?" He didn't hesitate. "I'd like that." Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, the Hope Table crew gathered for one final task. In the center of the field, they set up one long wooden table. No nameplates, no reserved signs, just a white cloth and mismatched chairs. Lucille Daniels brought out pitchers of iced tea. Major Daniels laid out serving trays of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and sweet corn. Brionna stood at one end, clipboard in hand, but it didn't feel like work. It felt like home. As the table filled, something magical happened. People didn't sit by affiliation or background or paycheck. They just sat. Veterans beside teenagers, shop owners beside the unemployed. An old man with a walker shared dessert with a tattooed teen in a hoodie. And at the center of it all, Noah sat beside Brionna. "Do you ever think one biscuit could start something like this?" he asked, licking whipped cream off his spoon. She shook her head, smiling. "Nope, but I'm glad it did." He nodded. "Me too." The music turned soft. The laughter settled like a warm quilt across the gathering. Lucille raised a toast. "To Brionna Reese," she said, lifting her glass, "who reminded us that kindness isn't weakness, and that courage doesn't always wear a uniform." Everyone raised their drinks, clinking gently. Brionna didn't cry. Not then. But later, when the crowd dispersed and the table stood quiet beneath the stars, she stayed behind for one last look, ran her hand across the wood grain, sat in the same seat she always had at the diner. Only now it wasn't a booth with a coffee pot and a laminated menu. It was a table built from compassion, set for everyone. And in that silence, Brionna finally heard what she'd been missing all those years. Not the clatter of plates or the buzz of orders, but the sound of a community choosing to love loudly, choosing to feed one another, choosing to stay.